You're muted.
Yeah, you're muted, Arnett.
Sorry. Before Mr. Coplis, are we expecting a John Coplis? Anybody?
He may or may not be here. He's
Here.
on our team, Arnett. So it's not a
Okay,
big deal.
I can let him in then. Okay,
Yep.
I just want to make sure it's okay to let him in. Okay, I apologize.
Thank you.
Roll call.
Yep.
Ms. Bates?
Here.
Mr. Bowman? He's here. Mr. Gussenberg?
Here.
Here. Ms. Harrigan? Not here. Chairman Kemp?
Here.
Kemp? Chair Kemp? Mr. Martelli?
Here.
Mr. Martinez? Mr. Neff?
Here.
Ms. Nichols?
Here.
Mr. Pangaro? Mr. Perugini?
Here.
Mr. Talbot?
Here.
Mr. Walsh?
Here.
And you have a quorum, Madam Chair.
Excellent. Thank you. All right, if we could just do stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty
and justice for all.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for jumping on for this meeting somewhat last minute. Wanted to get some action on the enrollment study. As you all know, Vin had sent out a request to 4 different companies to get bids to do the enrollment study for us. And we did get 2 proposals back, one from NESDEC and one from Malone and McBroom. Hopefully all of you have had a chance to take a look at them, read through them. I had also asked Colliers to give a recommendation, so you should all have had that as well. So what I'm hoping tonight is that we can have discussion, get any feedback, answer any questions, and hopefully be in a position to take a vote in order to move forward on this. So before I offer any comments, just does anybody have questions? And hopefully between Vin and our friends from Colliers, we'd be able to answer any questions that folks have from looking at the proposals. And hello, Mr. Orris has also joined us.
Anne Marie, if we can, I'd like Colliers to walk through their letter, because
Sure.
Obviously you look initially at low bid, and then I mean, they basically said that it's not as simple as it appears.
Yep, absolutely. Yep, there's definitely a difference between the two, and the cost difference isn't significant, really. And knowing that one did not include some of the scope is important. So yeah, Chuck, if you wouldn't mind, take us through your recommendation, that'd be great.
Sure. No, great synopsis there by Richard. So yeah, we took a look at both proposals, received 2, one from NESDEC, who's currently performing your enrollment projections, and I'm gonna share my screen here so we can all see it. I'm sure you all have it already, but I figure it might be easier. And then also from Malone and McBroom, who's located right there in Cheshire, as I'm sure you all well know. NESDEC's up in Marlborough, Mass, not too far away, and they do a lot of demographics throughout the state as well. Comparing the 2, we had asked for in the base mapping in the base demographics mapping of the school districts. It's a visual mapping, and if you've gone through, and I'm just gonna, Cheshire doesn't have that capability. That was one of the things we noted. They kind of excluded that from their proposal and proposed a third party, and we were very specific about that, because frankly having worked with Malone and other districts, Weathersfield was one of the examples, as well as South Windsor, those mapping graphics are very, very strong visuals for you to see the boundaries of all your, especially the elementary schools is primarily what we're talking about. Obviously the high school is the entire town. But they didn't include it. So when you look at the base cost of roughly 15,000 versus 20,000, had they included that in some way, shape, or manner, you're probably going to be more leveled off on your base fee. I don't know what it would be, but I'd imagine it would be a lot closer than what they are. Not that they're far off as it is. So they feel like they didn't really respond to that aspect other than excluding it. So it didn't really complete it for that. The alternative cost scenario, excuse me, we had asked for price per scenario. So We don't know what those are going to be. They can be 4 scenarios, they could be 6 scenarios. And I'm not talking minor variations of a scenario, I'm talking very drastic, different. And I'm saying if we close one school, what does it do if we close a different school, or if we, or you redraw district lines? Very different scenarios, not minor tweaks of, say, scenario 4 and a 4A. That might be a tweak. I wouldn't expect us to pay a full fee on that. I don't think Malone would charge us for that. But I'm not sure if NESDEC, the way they presented it, it appeared, I don't know if it's a lump sum or, but we did ask. It says page 3 only identify alternatives 5320. I'm assuming that that's per alternative, but they weren't clear on that, and I think Malone was. So they were pretty close between the two. I think here's our spreadsheet that we kind of did. 55 per scenario, and then they had the 5320 up here, so they were a little bit different. For that, the other difference, we'd ask for a cost per meeting because we're not sure exactly how many meetings we're going to have. Malone gives a cost of $1,250 per meeting, and NESDEC 195 per hour plus expenses. I don't think that's a big make or break. I think we can handle that either way if you decide to go with them. And then also NESDEC reflected a 20% discount to the district, which I think is nice on their behalf. Both firms are looking about 4 to 5 months on this, which we agree, based upon what we've done in the past, depending on when how decisions are made and how we move through the process. But I think those are reasonable timeframes. So those are pretty close overall in that. But essentially, when you look at the examples, I don't know if anybody had a chance to look at the NESDEC example. Theirs was a pretty straightforward. It was really reorganizing grades within that district that they gave us. It wasn't really, I didn't really see them as different scenarios versus if we move grades around or if we add on to a school here or there. It was much more simplified. So I'm not sure if they had the same capabilities to do that more in-depth, complicated type of scenario analysis that Malone can do. The other part, it's an intangible and subjective, is that Malone is in Cheshire. Rebecca, who's on their staff, I believe she was your town planner at one time in the past, the way I understand it. So that local knowledge, you can't put a price tag on that. And I think that's a huge advantage to them. And then the other thing, us knowing Malone, is they also have other services that may assist us in evaluating some of these scenarios from a civil, land use planning, environmental, that as we're looking, if we look at an option, say for a new school on a new site, we could always incorporate those and be an ad service, but they have that capability to evaluate, and then also their knowledge of the Office of School Construction Grants Review, space standards, and what that office looks for. So I think Malone just brings a higher level of complexity and capability to your town, which for this modernization plan, I think is warranted with that. So with that, I think, again, NESDEC is a good firm for demographics. I just don't know if they have that additional depth that you may be looking for that we would expect to help you with this plan.
Great, thanks, Chuck.
Any questions?
Are there any questions out there? Rich?
The only thing I would say is I've done a couple of redistricting situations in the past, and the mapping that Chuck talks about is just an essential piece. Otherwise, you just get buried in all the data. But being able to work off of a map and being able to see every student and the grade that they're in, and exactly what it's showing on the screen there, it really is an important piece to doing any kind of redistricting.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, definitely. Sylvia, I apologize, can't see everyone right now.
I will follow that up with what Rich said. In I'm wondering, when they do these enrollment studies, how in depth do they go into the town plan? We on the council are dealing with some new projects that are coming into town that could potentially bring in some additional residential spaces, which may indeed affect the enrollment. They may not, it may never happen, but the zoning is being adjusted to be able to allow for various uses of various zones. And that's a concern of mine, that we make sure that they are aware of the potential for growth in the town. We had a comment when we were in South Windsor about the fact that their enrollment had been declining,
Mhm.
declining, and then all of a sudden, halfway through the project, they increased their students by, I've forgotten, 700 or 800 kids.
A lot, yeah.
And that made quite a difference in the completion of the project. So they were surprised by it. The demographics were not on, I mean, they didn't get that right. But was that because they missed the part that there was going to be new development or new businesses that were bringing in new people? Or how is that part of the thing?
Yeah, I can answer that very accurate because I was part of that entire South Windsor process with Mike Zuba and Patrick. So what occurred and what we found that occurred in South Windsor is they were projecting a declining enrollment at the beginning of that master plan. And once we built the first school, it's almost like you build it and they will come scenario in a way. We built Orchard Hill, and I think you might have visited maybe Eli Terry, if I remember. When we built Orchard Hill, that was originally forecasted for 576 students. When we opened, it opened with 630 students. So that was the initial kind of, okay, what's going on here? And as we kept analyzing it, what Malone and McBroom found is that due to there was a stock of housing, rental housing that South Windsor possessed with 2 and 3 bedroom housing where they had this affinity group come in that was working with Cognizant out of Hartford. I think they're one of the insurance or healthcare on the IT side. So there's a large population from I think Middle Eastern countries that came over. And what had happened is when they come over, my understanding is that they want to populate. We want to go where we're familiar with and folks that we're familiar with. So they all kind of came to South Windsor and talking to each other and basically populated in South Windsor the way I understand that group. So there was this surge there, and then ultimately there was additional migration into the district. And so I think it was a combination of two. They didn't miss any. We don't think they missed anything. They were talking to the town planner, which they would do here. And I kind of highlighted the paragraph they talk about housing, demographic, economic analysis. They're going to be looking at what are the available parcels for development. They're going to talk to the town planner and go, what developers are talking with the town, and even exploring potential developments, what's for sale, in addition to all the other data. So in South Windsor, it was really a phenomenon. Their growth has been 12% per year, where all their peer districts have been plus or minus 1 or 2%. So it's really been a phenomenon. They've adjusted well. The story's been, I'm sure you spoke with South Windsor. It's been a little bit crazy. Dr. Carter's been challenged there, and but it wasn't anything they missed. It was just a simple phenomenon that they came to South Windsor. Unfortunately, they were able to react and accommodate.
And I appreciate that. We felt that they were very comfortable with the way you helped them accommodate that. But I just think it's something that it may be an anomaly, it may be unusual, but it could happen. So we need to keep that in the back of our minds, and maybe not expect that to happen here, but we need to collect as much data as we possibly can looking forward. That's all.
Especially with the New York trend leaving New York City with COVID and people right now thinking of leaving the city. I think all of Connecticut's got to be on the lookout for that.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Matt?
Marie,
Yep, Matt.
I sit on planning and zoning. We have 100 units coming in for a public hearing in 2 weeks. The Board of Education has done some sort of demographics of some of the complexes in Cheshire already, which they should probably share with us. I believe it was Courier Woods, Ives Hill, Quarry Village, and Old Town, showing the number of students per development. It also should be noted that there could be coming in the future. It was approved within the last 6 months. The north end has, one of the parcels up there has been approved for 300 units. So the potential exists that we could have 400 apartments coming online in the next 12 to 18 months, or start to come online. I don't know what the absorption rate will be, but we are certainly right now working on the 100 unit proposal. I black.
Lost Matt there, maybe.
Yep,
think
I don't
we
know.
lost
We
him, yeah.
lost him. All right, hopefully he will come back in. I have Chuck, Don. Anybody else in the queue? I just don't want to miss anybody. All right, Chuck.
Yeah, I just had a question on the project timeline. So the Mylona McBroom one kind of outlines it a little bit better.
Right.
But I don't really understand when the deliverable kind of comes in here. So they talk task 1 through 5 is really only taking about 2.5 months. And then they go another month and a half on alternatives. Is there not a deliverable prior to us giving them direction on alternatives of what they found for an enrollment? Do you know, Chuck?
Oh, Chuck, you're muted.
There we go. Try to mute in between. So this is their timeline, and this can flex a little bit, and I think this is just to kind of show how they see it. So obviously the initial data collection and in the base, through the first 2.5 months, task really 1 through 5 is really your background data, your existing data, building that database, going, what did you have in the past? What are we projecting for as is in the future? So that's the first, and they'll do a report. Typically those phases we stop. They'll give you a presentation that has 20, 30 slides. They go through the birth rate data, all the data that you've seen in their proposal. They're going to present that to you and talk about their findings and where they see the trends going for Cheshire. And they'll also compare it to surrounding towns and your peer type towns that they work with. Then in this alternatives period, that's where they and us we collaborate together. So they're going to look at their capacity utilization. We're going to see where some of the trends are going. We're going to on our side, we're going to analyze the space standard for your existing school, take the enrollment and go, is the school right size? Is it too big? Is it too small? For every single school, and see what the data is telling us. And we suggest we try not to, at least on our side, we don't have predetermined alternatives. We let the data tell us what it tells us and where it steers us. Where some of you folks, you may have an idea of this is what we should do and this is the plan and that school should get expanded with your local knowledge. We take it very objectively and go, what are the numbers telling us? And then bring in your local knowledge of the district and what is going on as well, and kind of merge those together. And we'll come up with probably initial 4 or 5 options, and then you'll have little offshoots of these alternatives. Typically in the process we've seen, it might be an alternative or scenario 3, a 3A, 3B, or you may see one scenario that, hey, let's expand that a little further, and we'll chop that up a little bit more. But that's an interactive back and forth process between ourselves, Malone, and the committee on what the recommendations will be. And then you might have recommendations yourself. Say, hey, what about this scenario that we've been thinking about? Or you may know locally there's a property for sale. We want to explore building a new school there that we may or may not know about. So that's a very iterative process for the alternatives. And we go back and forth. And as part of those alternatives, they're looking at analysis, but we're also looking at a high-low probable cost scenario as well. Go, what's the range these alternatives gonna cost for it? So it's an iterative process, but at the end of that, the recommendations that we've been working together on those. It's not going from start to finish and give you recommendations. It's a interactive process with you.
But I guess getting into the alternatives, we really don't talk about that until you're 2.5 months into the project here, right?
That's correct. Because really, it comes.
So what are we doing in the 2.5 months till then?
So really here, so what we're doing, what they'd be doing is the demographics. we've been in the process of doing quantity takeoffs in your schools. We want to have all that data ahead of time so we know what the square footages are. We're looking at other studies and gathering that existing data. So as they're doing that, the key thing is in these scenarios, and we've seen in districts where they show a solution, but the background data was never done to go, well, what do you have now? Because if we don't know what we have now, there's some schools that may not have to do anything. They may be big enough. And where people are like, well, we need to do an addition. Well, does the numbers support it? Because when you go out to the public with a referendum, they're going to go, how did you come to this scenario? And we can say, well, the existing data is this. It's too small. Your enrollment is projecting to be higher than what you can accommodate. So this is all, again, from 1 through 5 is really going, what do we have, what's in place, and what are you projected to? Now we can start looking at the scenarios with that data. So for them, there's not a whole lot of interaction at this time, Chuck. It's more here's what you have in place, and then we start talking about the ideas, and we'll be kind of talking about them in the meantime, in the
Got it.
interim. But until they have those really good numbers, because now once we have the data, we can manipulate it, we can move it. They have those lines drawn on the maps. You know, when they're looking at scenarios and say, okay, if we redistrict a school, they're going to talk to your transportation supervisor and go, okay, here's where we want to divide it to street. And they may say, well, no, that's not a good, they know the local kids and the families, and, do we split it down this road or that road? And they really dive into that level of detail. So.
Thanks.
Okay, great. Don, I think you were.
Thank you. Looking at the two proposals, I mean, Mylona McBroom, I think was 129 pages total. I mean, it was very comprehensive and very well done. And I could see why you're pushing us towards that one, because it does seem to have all the bells and whistles that we probably need, maybe more than what we need. But the one thing I noticed, like you said, NESEC was giving us a discount for something. The $1,250 per meeting, and you're suggesting 4 meetings, I believe, which is $5,000 more, where versus $195 plus expenses. I mean, that's a big price as well. And I'm assuming you'll be able to negotiate some of this
Sure.
with them. And being a Cheshire business, and not having to travel that far, perhaps we can knock that number down some, because I think that's a little steep for per meeting, because some of our meetings might only last 2 hours or an hour and a half, and yeah,
I think they'll be very willing to work with you guys, Don.
okay. Yeah, and the bottom line is, because I'm looking at all these different things, and everything looks great with all the colors and everything else. I mean, we're just trying to figure out in the next 10 years how many students we're going to have in our schools. Is that, I mean, because and it's funny how when I look at these school enrollment studies, many of them have increases going over the next 10 years, while the state of Connecticut is saying we're going to be losing 13-14% of our population in the next 10 years. So I get concerned about that sometimes when I say, okay, how are we losing that much percentage of population? But I mean, unless they're all retirees and we're getting all young families moving in, I don't know. So.
Yeah, I think the value, and again, Malone, like ourselves, we work in many districts throughout the state. Malone does as well. Obviously, you talked about South Windsor, but they work with Fairfield. I think they work in Greenwich. So they work with many different districts in Connecticut to bring, I think, a better holistic view of Connecticut as a whole. So they know where the hot spots are at in Connecticut, and they know where the spots that are just steady, or maybe a slightly decline in enrollments. And I think having that more general knowledge of Connecticut helps all the districts in their specific cases. But going back to the first question is, what are the enrollments going to be for the next 10 years as is? And that's where we pause and we go, okay, what is that data telling you? What's it telling us? Is there a need, for someone's going to be, is there a need to do anything? But also we're going to be looking at the conditions. We're going to be looking at the conditions of your school and go, which ones that are in need of more attention, and what is the scope of that need? If it's purely, say, a renovation, we don't have to do any additions. That's going to factor into the total project budget that we estimate. We're not going to talk about an addition. We're just talking in place. And then we'll have to evaluate, okay, is it a good candidate for a renovation? Because there are requirements to meet with the state to procure renovation status. That's not an automatic status. So, you know, it's really a step-by-step process, a methodical process of going, get your existing data, see what it tells us, and then we talk and go, where do we want to go from here? We talk about the alternatives, but we're not going to start that until we've looked at the data and we're all comfortable with what it's telling us and making recommendations.
All right,
Thank
and
you.
I want to get Tony in because I know he's going to have to jump soon. Tony, you
Oh.
still there?
Yeah, I'm still here. Thanks, Ron. I'm sorry. I'm just reading my material for the next meeting, but I am listening.
I know. We're on the
No,
clock here.
No, I just want to add that you can never have enough too much detail on enrollment studies. We learned this lesson in 2015 and 16 in the last plan. I think we used Urbonics at the time to do that study. And one of the reasons why we went that firm back then was because they went beyond just the NASDAQ numbers, look at state and local trends, projections. And it's funny, I see what Don is saying too about increased enrollment, but we saw the same thing in the projection 4 years ago, where in the near term, we'll see a decrease for a while. At some point, it'll bubble back up. So I hope if we go with my loan with Broome, they'll provide some more detail behind that, explain that. But I think having the big picture is huge, knowing not just what the state is doing, but what we're doing locally plays into that. So I mean, I would fully support my loan proposal. I think it's much more detailed and bodes well for this committee. But that being said, I got to drop off and get the next meeting going. So thank you for all your work, Charles, on
You're
getting this
welcome. Thank
going.
you.
And Ben. So hopefully we'll see the results of the study very soon. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Tony. All right, so before we lose folks, how is everyone? Does anyone have additional questions? Are we in a position to take action? You know, I personally felt that Malone's proposal was much more comprehensive. I didn't think the price difference was significant. I do think we could certainly go back to them and try to negotiate to get a little bit closer. I think there's certainly, that's definitely an exercise that we would want to pursue, but really depends on how everyone's feeling about that. Peter.
I am certainly prepared, Madam Chair, to cast a vote in favor of
Okay.
my loan as the vendor for this project.
Would you like to make a motion?
I would love to make a motion that the School Modernization Committee accept the RFP from My Loan and McBroom to move forward with our study of enrollment.
Excellent, thank you. Is there a
Second.
second? Excellent, Don, thank you. I guess we'll do anyone not in favor? So that means everyone all in favor, and that passes. Yep, all in favor. Excellent. All right, thank you very much. Appreciate that. We're happy to get that that in motion. So that's a big chunk of work that needs to get done. So appreciate everyone jumping on for that. And that really concludes our business for tonight. Oh, I'm sorry, Andrew. Who was Andrew? You got to go. I know everyone jumping off. Rich has to go. There's Board of Ed meetings. There's other meetings. The only business we have left is a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
And a second.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Thanks so much, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank
Be in
you.
touch, Ben.
Everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.